Before they were old enough to vote, they were facing life sentences. These are the teen killers whose crimes shocked even seasoned investigators. Nathaniel Abraham, 11 years old. Abraham became a focal point of the American juvenile justice system when he became one of the youngest people in U.S. history to be charged and convicted of murder as an adult. He grew up in Pontiac, Michigan, and his childhood was marked by severe developmental and psychological challenges. According to court ordered psychological evaluations, Abraham had an overall IQ of 78 and operated at an intellectual and emotional range of a 6 to 8-year-old child, functioning significantly below his actual age. Leading up to the homicide, he had already compiled a history of minor behavioral offenses in his neighborhood. On October 29, 1997, at 11 years and 9 months old, Abraham was outside on a hillside in Pontiac. Armed with a borrowed .22 caliber rifle, he fired a shot that struck 18-year-old Ronnie Green Jr. in the head as Green was walking out of a local convenience store. Green died from the single gunshot wound. Abraham was arrested the following day, still wearing his Halloween face paint after attending a school function. During the trial, his high-profile defense attorney, Geoffrey Fieger, argued that the shooting was a tragic accident, claiming Abraham was aiming at distant trees and that the bullet must have ricocheted. However, the prosecution emphasized that he had fired that same rifle at a neighbor's house just hours before killing Green. Abraham was prosecuted under a strict 1997 Michigan law that permitted children of any age to be tried as adults for serious violent felonies. In November 1999, at 13 years old, a state jury rejected the first-degree murder charge but found him guilty of second-degree murder. Although convicted as an adult, Oakland County Probate Judge Eugene Moore rejected the prosecution's request for a life sentence or a blended sentence, which would carry adult prison backup time. Judge Moore publicly criticized the law as fundamentally flawed, stating that placing an 11-year-old in an adult prison would completely eliminate any chance of rehabilitation. Instead, he handed down a juvenile disposition, ordering Abraham to be held in a secure juvenile detention facility until his 21st birthday. Abraham spent nearly a decade at a juvenile facility called Children's Village. During this time, he obtained a high school diploma or equivalent, wrote poetry, and took anger management courses. He was formally released from juvenile state supervision on January 18, 2007, just one day before turning 21. Upon his release, supporters helped him secure an apartment in Bay City, Michigan, and he initially made plans to study maintenance at Delta College and pursue a music career. However, he struggled immensely to adapt to life outside of institutional supervision, repeatedly returning to the criminal justice system. In May 2008, just 18 months after his release, undercover Pontiac police caught Abraham selling drugs from his car trunk. He pleaded guilty to possession with intent to deliver 254 ecstasy pills, and he was sentenced to 4 to 20 years in adult prison. While serving his drug sentence, he was convicted of assaulting prison guards in 2010, which lengthened his time behind bars. He was paroled from adult prison in June 2017 and successfully discharged from parole on June 28, 2018. However, less than 2 months later, in August 2018, he was arrested for indecent exposure after allegedly exposing himself to a neighbor. When deputies attempted to execute a warrant after he skipped his court date, Abraham fought back, punching 3 deputies before being subdued with a taser. In March 2019, while out on bond, Abraham was caught selling methamphetamine and heroin to undercover officers across Oakland County. He faced multiple felony charges, including 5 counts of delivery and manufacture of methamphetamine and delivery of fentanyl. In June 2019, a Michigan judge sentenced Abraham to 6 to 40 years in prison for his drug distribution operations. He remains incarcerated in a Michigan state prison. He is a father to a son, Nathaniel Jamar Abraham Jr., who was born shortly before his 2019 reincarceration. Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper, both 16 years old. These two brutally stabbed their classmate, 16-year-old Cassie Jo Stoddard, to death in 2006. The case garnered widespread media attention as the Scream murder because the killers explicitly modeled their crime after the horror film franchise Scream, and they also documented their plans on video. Both boys grew up in Pocatello, Idaho, and attended Pocatello High School as juniors alongside their victim. Outwardly, they appear to be relatively ordinary teenagers, though they harbored deep hidden obsessions. Draper had a noticeable stutter as a child, which reportedly caused him severe social anxiety and feelings of deep insecurity. He later admitted that he felt like a nobody and believed committing a massive, terrible crime would finally make him somebody. Adamczyk was a seemingly normal kid from a protective family. His mother later publicly defended him as a good kid. However, the boy shared a dark bond with Draper. Together, they became profoundly obsessed with the 1999 Columbine High School massacre and the horror movie Scream. They created a kill list featuring a dozen of their classmates, aiming to eventually carry out a school shooting. Cassie Jo Stoddard, born December 21, 1989, was a bright, popular 16-year-old high school junior. Described by friends and family as kind and full of life, she was a close classmate of both Adamczyk and Draper. On September 22, 2006, Cassie was house-sitting and pet-sitting at her aunt and uncle's home in the Whispering Cliffs neighborhood of Pocatello. Knowing she was there, her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, invited Adamczyk and Draper to hang out at the house. While there, Draper secretly unlocked the basement door. Adamczyk and Draper pretended to leave and go to a local movie theater. Instead, they drove down the street, put on dark clothes and white masks, and sneaked back into the house through the unlocked basement. To terrify Cassie, the boys repeatedly flipped the house's master circuit breakers to cut the power, causing the lights to go out. Beckham's mother picked him up late that night, leaving Cassie alone. Once she was by herself, Adamczyk and Draper came upstairs armed with hunting knives and attacked her. They stabbed her 30 times. Throughout the entire process, before, during the drive, and immediately after the murder, the boys recorded themselves on a camcorder. In the footage, they could be seen laughing and bragging, with Draper saying they were gonna go down in history and be just like Scream except real life. Cassie's body was discovered 2 days later when her relatives returned home. Following a swift investigation, police recovered the buried camcorder tape, masks, and knives. The boys were tried separately as adults in 2007. Both were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. On August 31, 2007, Judge Lynn Windmill sentenced both teenagers to mandatory life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years to life for the conspiracy charge. Both Tori Adamczyk and Brian Draper remained incarcerated at the Idaho State Correctional Institution in Kuna, Idaho. They are housed at the same facility, but are strictly kept separate, only seeing each other in passing. Over the years, both men have launched numerous legal appeals arguing that mandatory life sentences without parole for juveniles constitute cruel and unusual punishment. However, the Idaho Supreme Court and federal courts have repeatedly upheld their sentences. Their case remains highly prominent in true crime media. They were featured in a 2013 documentary Lost for Life, a 2024 Dateline NBC special, and a Hulu docuseries titled The Scream Murder, a true teen horror story. While Adamczyk and his family have spent years attempting to downplay his role, Draper has publicly expressed immense remorse from prison, stating that he thinks about his actions every day and wishes he could go back in time to change what he did. Maxwell Adams, 17 years old. Adams was convicted of first-degree murder for fatally stabbing his 46-year-old father Dennis when he was 17 years old. Adams spent his upbringing in Arlington, Virginia. His family lived in a residential area near Thomas Jefferson Middle School, and public records regarding his specific high school studies or academic record are heavily limited due to privacy protections surrounding his minor status at the time of the arrest. However, official statements from the Arlington County Police Department emphasized that the father, Dennis Adams, had spent his entire life dedicated to caring for and raising his son. On April 1, 2016, at approximately 8 p.m., an intense argument broke out between Maxwell and his father inside their home. The verbal dispute rapidly escalated into extreme domestic violence. Armed with a sharp object, the 17-year-old launched a physical assault, stabbing his father multiple times inside the residence. The struggle continued outside the home as the injured father tried to flee. Emergency dispatchers subsequently received calls and sent police units to the 100 block of South Glebe Road, which was just a few blocks away from the original crime scene. When police arrived, they found both men suffering from stab wounds, Dennis with life-threatening injuries and Maxwell with minor injuries. Maxwell immediately attempted to deflect blame, fabricating a cover story that they were both victims of a home invasion. However, investigators quickly discovered massive inconsistencies in his statements and recovered physical evidence that dismantled his fake story. Dennis Adams was rushed to a local hospital where he succumbed to his wounds and died. Because of the severity of the crime, Maxwell was prosecuted through the adult justice system. On September 13, 2017, inside the Arlington County Circuit Court, Judge Luis DiMatteo handed down his sentence: 50 years in prison with 23 years of that time suspended for first-degree murder, 5 years in prison for stabbing in the commission of a felony, and because the judge ordered the sentence to run consecutively, Adams was given a total active sentence of 32 years in state prison. During the hearing, Arlington County Commonwealth's attorney Theophany Stamos publicly noted that the verdict brought a measure of closure to the extended family, pointing out that Adams would have decades behind bars to contemplate how his actions destroyed his own household. Maxwell Adams passed away on March 14, 2019. Earlier that evening, he told the authorities that if they did not allow him to call his mother, that he was going to off himself. Less than 2 years into his sentence, he just gave up on life. Christina Atkins, 13 years old. Atkins became the subject of intense media scrutiny in Michigan after she was arrested for secretly poisoning and killing her grandmother when she was just 13 years old. Christina Atkins grew up in a profoundly unstable family environment in Lenawee County, Michigan. When she was only 8 months old, her biological mother, Tina Atkins, surrendered her care. Her maternal grandmother, Virginia Ginny Bentley, and step-grandfather, Ireland Buzz Bentley Jr., took Christina in and raised her as their own daughter. Because she had not seen her biological mother since she was 2 years old, Christina called her grandmother Mom. Beneath the surface, Atkins struggled heavily. According to her defense attorney, Michael McFarland, Christina had a deeply troubled childhood that was plagued by severe mental health issues and substance abuse by the time she reached early adolescence. Following her arrest, both Christina and her estranged biological mother alleged that Christina had been subjected to ongoing physical and psychological abuse inside her grandparents' household, claims that her step-grandfather vehemently denied. In an eerie parallel, just weeks after Christina was sentenced for murder in late 2008, her biological mother, Tina Atkins, was arrested and charged in Kentucky for complicity in the murder of her own boyfriend. Virginia Bentley was 53 years old at the time of her death. Family, friends, and neighbors described her as a dedicated woman who did her absolute best to raise Christina and her sister to do the right thing. At the time, Virginia was managing a highly stressful household. She was the primary caretaker for Christina, while simultaneously nursing her husband Buzz, who was battling cancer. In the summer of 2006, 13-year-old Christina formulated a calculated plot to assassinate her grandmother. Because her step-grandfather was a cancer patient, the household had a steady supply of prescribed morphine sulfate tablets. Christina systematically stole the morphine. Over the course of 3 consecutive days in late July 2006, she meticulously opened her grandmother's daily medication capsules, packed them with the stolen morphine, and put them back. Unknowingly consuming the tampered capsules, Virginia Bentley suffered acute morphine intoxication. She passed away on August 1, 2006. Because of the suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of a relatively young woman, an autopsy was ordered, which ultimately revealed lethal levels of morphine in her system. Due to the premeditated nature of the crime, prosecutors aggressively pushed to try the teenager as an adult. After a state psychologist initially deemed her competent to stand trial, Atkins accepted a plea deal to avoid a first-degree murder trial. On October 10, 2008, a tearful 16-year-old Christina pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and possession of a controlled substance, openly admitting to the judge that her explicit intent was to kill her grandmother. Her sentencing unfolded in two distinct phases. On October 31, 2008, Lenawee County Probate Judge Margaret No rejected the juvenile disposition. She sentenced Atkins as an adult to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. In April 2009, her appellate defense team successfully argued for a structured resentencing. Judge No vacated the life term and replaced it with a fixed sentence of 30 to 45 years in prison. While this deal effectively increased her minimum time served from 15-20 years to a strict 30 years, it was legally deemed more advantageous because standard life sentences in Michigan heavily restrict a prisoner's real-world chances of ever being approved by a parole board. Following her 2009 resentencing, Christina Atkins was absorbed into the adult female penal system under the Michigan Department of Corrections. At her sentencing, the judge heavily urged her to use her decades behind bars to focus on psychological counseling, drug rehabilitation, and completing her high school education, because her sentence dictates that she must serve a mandatory minimum of 30 years before she can even be considered for release. She is not projected to become eligible for her first parole board review until 2038, at which point she will be 46 years old. Victor Alas, 15 years old, and Jose Reyes, 16 years old. Victor Manuel Alas and Jose Reyes are individuals from Texas who were convicted for a high-profile crime committed when they were just teenagers. The case drew significant attention due to its nature and the age of those involved. Both individuals were residents at the Clear Lake area near Houston, Texas. Reports from the trial indicated that they attended local schools and were known to have struggles with substance abuse. Jose Reyes, in particular, was noted by acquaintances for his preoccupation with occult themes. Corian Cervantes was a 15-year-old girl described by her family as a kind and emotionally sensitive teenager. On the night of February 4, 2014, she left her home following a disagreement and encountered Alas and Reyes. Because she was an acquaintance of Alas, she reportedly trusted the two individuals before the incident occurred. The crime took place in an abandoned apartment in Houston. The girl decided to go out. She went to a friend's house where she drank and smoked Mary Jane. Reyes and Dallas were also at this party, and they led Corian to a vacant apartment. According to court testimonies and police interviews, the motive was linked to Reyes's disturbing fixation on occult rituals. The two individuals subjected the victim to a prolonged and violent assault that resulted in her death. Alas strangled the girl with a belt while Reyes brutally beat her with an ashtray and a toilet tank lid. When she bit one of her attackers, the duo gouged her eyes out with a plastic curtain rod and stabbed her with a screwdriver. The two essayed her body before and after she died, and also carved an upside-down crucifix into her abdomen. The girl's body was so badly mutilated that the person who discovered her body, someone who actually knew the 15-year-old, could not identify the teen. Pieces of the porcelain from the toilet lid were still embedded in her flesh. After the murder, Reyes told two people explicit details about what they had done to the girl, and someone reported him to the police. Later in court, Reyes smiled for the cameras. Due to the severity of the crime, both teenagers were certified to stand trial as adults in Harris County, Texas. However, because they were under the age of 18 at the time of the offense, they were legally ineligible for the death penalty under United States Supreme Court precedents regarding juvenile offenders. Both individuals were tried and convicted of capital murder in separate proceedings. Jose Reyes was convicted in December 2014. Evidence presented included communications where he showed a lack of remorse for his actions. He was sentenced to life in prison. Victor Alas was convicted in June 2015. While his defense argued he was under the influence of Reyes, his own statements to the police confirmed his active participation in the assault. He also received a life sentence. Victor Alas and Jose Reyes are currently serving their sentences within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice system. Under Texas law, for juveniles convicted of capital murder, they must serve a minimum of 40 years before becoming eligible to apply for parole. Consequently, neither individual will be eligible for parole consideration until approximately 2054. Legal appeals filed by the defendants to overturn their convictions have been unsuccessful. Peyton Allen, 18 years old. Allen shot and killed his sleeping father in their Texas home. His case drew significant legal and public attention due to his developmental disabilities and allegations of domestic trauma. According to his mother, Brandy Allen, Payton was diagnosed with multiple autistic tendencies from birth. During his trial, two independent psychologists testified that Payton suffered from severe intellectual disabilities and he also exhibited definitive autistic behavioral patterns. Court ordered psychological evaluations revealed that Payton lived in a constant, paralyzing fear of his father. He told psychologists that his father had subjected him to physical violence that caused him to lose consciousness on 5 separate occasions. Caregivers noted that in the period leading up to the homicide, Payton's behavior became increasingly erratic and aggressive. He began yelling and he was caught secretly hiding weapons around the home. Brandon Lee Allen was 47 years old at the time of his death. He lived with his son on Nevada Road in a rural pocket of Hockley County. While local sheriffs noted they had no record of previous domestic disturbance calls to the home, the defense heavily emphasized Brandon's allegedly abusive behavior during the criminal trial. The crime took place in the early morning hours of June 10, 2017. While Brandon Allen was asleep on the living room couch, Payton retrieved a firearm from the kitchen. He approached his father and shot him at close range directly in the forehead. Following the murder, Payton collected the spent shell casing and threw it into a neighborhood dumpster. He grabbed a packed bag, took his father's pickup truck, and fled to a friend's house in nearby Lubbock, Texas. The two men were expected to drive to San Antonio for a family reunion. When they failed to arrive, worried relatives requested a welfare check. A neighbor helped the sheriff's deputy enter the residence, discovering Brandon's body on the couch. Texas Rangers tracked Payton to Lubbock on June 11, 2017. During his interrogation, the boy confessed to killing his father. Allen's legal process was prolonged due to questions surrounding his mental competency. In July 2017, following a psychological evaluation, a judge reduced his bond from $250,000 to $100,000. He was released into the strict custody of his mother in Austin County under intense conditions, including electronic monitoring, curfews, and mandatory psychiatric check-ins. He remained out on bond for nearly 5 years awaiting trial. In March 2022, a Hockley County jury rejected the defense's arguments regarding his intellectual capacity, convicting the 23-year-old of first-degree murder after 5 hours of deliberation. On March 16, 2022, Payton was sentenced to 47 years in prison and ordered to pay a $4,000 fine. Following his sentencing, Allen was immediately remanded into the custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He challenged his conviction, but the Seventh Court of Appeals of Texas officially upheld his 47-year sentence in a memorandum opinion on June 30, 2023. He remains securely incarcerated in a Texas state facility, and he must serve at least half of his sentence before he can be considered for parole. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.